March 14, 1943. 0347 hours. Bay of Biscay, 200 miles west of Brest, France. The German U-boat commander Kapitänleutnant Werner Hartmann brought his periscope above the black Atlantic waters for what should have been a routine surface scan. U-667 had been submerged for 16 hours, and the diesel engines needed air. The batteries were depleting. His crew of 47 men waited in the fetid atmosphere below, counting the minutes until they could crack the hatches and breathe. Hartmann saw nothing. Empty ocean. Empty sky. He gave the order to surface. What he didn't see, what he couldn't possibly have seen in the darkness, was the aircraft already diving toward him. No metal skin to catch moonlight. No engine roar to betray its approach. Just wood, fabric, and two Rolls-Royce Merlin engines throttled back to whisper quiet, descending through 3,000 feet at 280 knots. The British called it the Wooden Wonder. The Germans would soon call it the Midnight Ghost. In 7 minutes, U-667 would become another statistic in a technological revolution that turned Hitler's submarine fleet from hunters into prey. The weapon that would break the U-boat threat wasn't forged in steel foundries. It was built in furniture factories by craftsmen who had spent their lives making dining tables and grandfather clocks. By March 1943, the Battle of the Atlantic had reached its critical phase. Admiral Karl Donitz commanded 240 operational U-boats, the largest submarine fleet ever assembled. His wolf-pack tactics were strangling Britain. In February alone, German submarines had sunk 63 Allied merchant ships, 360,000 tons of desperately needed supplies sent to the bottom of the Atlantic. The mathematics were brutal and simple. Britain imported 55 million tons of supplies annually. The U-boats were destroying ships faster than Allied shipyards could replace them. Churchill later wrote that the U-boat peril was the only thing that ever truly frightened him during the entire war. If the submarine campaign succeeded, Britain would starve, and the invasion of Europe would become impossible. The Royal Navy had corvettes, destroyers, and depth charges. They had ASTIC, active sonar detection and ranging, that could locate submerged submarines. But they faced a fundamental problem that negated every advantage: the mid-Atlantic gap. Aircraft of 1942 lacked the range to patrol the central Atlantic, creating a 600-mile-wide black pit where U-boats operated with near impunity. Convoys entering this zone were essentially blind, waiting for torpedoes to announce the presence of submarines they couldn't detect until too late. RAF Coastal Command desperately needed long-range maritime patrol aircraft. The American B-24 Liberator could reach the mid-Atlantic, but production priorities sent most of them to bombing campaigns over Europe. Britain's own 4-engine bombers, the Lancaster, Halifax, and Stirling, were committed to strategic bombing. Requests for maritime patrol variants were consistently denied. Air Chief Marshal Arthur Harris famously stated that his heavy bombers were for destroying German cities, not wandering about the ocean looking for needles in haystacks. The existing maritime patrol aircraft were woefully inadequate. The short Sunderland flying boat had range but was slow and vulnerable. The Lockheed Hudson was fast but short-ranged. The Armstrong Whitworth Whitley was neither fast nor long-ranged. U-boats could spot these aircraft from miles away and dive to safety with time to spare. The standard patrol altitude of 5,000 feet gave submarines approximately 4 to 5 minutes of warning time, more than enough to submerge beyond attack depth. Donitz had refined his surface tactics accordingly. U-boats traveled on the surface whenever possible, where they were faster, could recharge batteries, and provide better crew conditions. They posted lookouts who could spot aircraft at extreme distances. The standing order was simple: dive at first sight of aircraft, surface when clear, continue the hunt. The system worked perfectly against existing patrol aircraft. British Admiralty records from January 1943 documented the crisis with devastating clarity: current aircraft capabilities insufficient to close mid-Atlantic gap. Submarine sinkings of merchant vessels exceed replacement capacity. Without technological solution, Atlantic supply lines will fail within 8 months. Britain faces potential starvation by year's end. The solution had been flying for 2 years, but nobody had thought to use it for submarine hunting. It was designed as a fast bomber, built for precision strikes against distant targets. It could fly higher, faster, and farther than almost any aircraft in service. And it was made almost entirely of wood. The de Havilland Mosquito had first flown on November 25, 1940, and was immediately dismissed by officials who believed modern aircraft required metal construction. Air Ministry procurement officers called it Freeman's Folly after Air Marshal Wilfred Freeman, who had championed the design. The concept seemed absurd, a twin-engine aircraft with no defensive armament, built primarily of wood, expected to survive through speed alone. Geoffrey de Havilland had designed something revolutionary disguised as something obsolete. The airframe used a sandwich construction technique, 2 thin layers of birch plywood separated by balsa wood core, bonded with casein adhesive made from milk protein. The result was lighter than aluminum construction and, surprisingly, stronger in many applications. The wooden structure also provided unexpected advantages. It was non-magnetic, making it invisible to magnetic detection systems, and it could be produced without competing for strategic aluminum supplies. More importantly, it could be manufactured in facilities that would never qualify as aircraft factories. Piano makers, furniture manufacturers, and carpentry shops across Britain received contracts. Hughes Lockwood Limited, which had built cricket pavilions and garden sheds, suddenly found themselves constructing fighter bomber wings. Roofing contractors who had never touched an aircraft learned to laminate fuselage sections. The decentralized production made the Mosquito nearly impossible for German intelligence to track or bombing campaigns to disrupt. The specifications defied conventional wisdom. Maximum speed, 380 miles per hour, faster than most fighters. Service ceiling, 36,000 feet. Range with standard fuel, 1,620 miles. But with drop tanks and cruise climb techniques, specialized crews were achieving operational ranges exceeding 2,400 miles, enough to reach the mid-Atlantic gap and return with fuel reserves. The twin Rolls-Royce Merlin 21 engines, the same that powered Spitfires, provided 1,460 horsepower each. The aircraft could outrun virtually anything the Luftwaffe fielded in 1943. Squadron leader Harold Pennington Smythe, who had transferred from Bomber Command to Coastal Command in January 1943, later wrote in his memoir, "My first sight of the Mosquito was underwhelming. It looked like something a wealthy eccentric might have built in his barn. The wood construction seemed flimsy, almost toy-like compared to the Lancasters I had been flying. Then I took it up. The acceleration was astonishing. The handling was light, responsive, almost fighter-like despite the size. And the speed, God, the speed. We could cruise at altitudes and velocities that made us effectively untouchable. But speed and range weren't enough for anti-submarine warfare. The Mosquito needed modifications that would transform it from bomber to submarine hunter. Air Vice Marshal Geoffrey Bromet, commanding RAF 19 Group responsible for Western approaches, had seen the potential in late 1942. His staff prepared specifications for a maritime strike variant that would merge the Mosquito's performance with purpose-built anti-submarine equipment. The modifications came together at RAF maintenance units between January and March 1943. Coastal Command Mosquito FB.Vis received specialized equipment, ASV Mark III centimetric radar with retractable radome, Lee light, a 22-inch searchlight producing 11 million candle power, rocket projectile rails for 8 60-pound RP-3 rockets, and modified bomb bay for 500-pound depth charges. The total modification weight was 1,200 pounds, but the Mosquito's performance margins absorbed it easily. The aircraft could now detect submarines from 40 miles away using radar, approach at wavetop height below radar detection, and deliver devastating strikes before U-boats could dive. The wooden aircraft had become a submarine killer. March 14, 1943. 0354 hours. U-667 had been fully surfaced for 6 minutes. The diesel engines hammered their rhythmic thunder, replenishing the battery banks and clearing the toxic atmosphere from the interior compartments. Hartmann remained on the bridge with 3 lookouts, scanning quadrants according to doctrine. The night was moonless, visibility perhaps 3 miles under starlight. Perfect conditions for surface operations. Flight Lieutenant James Blackburn and his navigator, Flying Officer Robert Thornton, were 19 minutes into their descent from 8,000 feet. They had detected U-667's radar signature 38 miles away. The submarine's METOX radar detector was ironically making them more visible to British centimetric radar than if they'd been running silent. Blackburn had immediately throttled back to cruise power and begun a gentle descent to wave height, approaching from the submarine's stern quarter where lookouts historically paid less attention. The Mosquito descended through cloud layers at precisely calculated angles. Too steep and the engines would overspeed. Too shallow and they'd arrive too high for effective attack. Thornton called out altitudes and distances from the radar returns: 5 miles, altitude 1,200 feet. 4 miles, altitude 800 feet. 3 miles, altitude 400 feet. At 2 miles, Blackburn leveled at 50 feet above the wave tops, throttled back to 240 knots, and activated the armed position for all weapons systems. The rocket projectiles were ready. The depth charges were primed. The lee light was prepared but would remain dark until the final seconds. Early illumination would only give the submarine time to dive. Thornton announced, 1 mile, target bearing 090, speed 10 knots, still surfaced. Recommend attack in 30 seconds. Blackburn acknowledged with a hand gesture. Speaking was unnecessary. They'd rehearsed this profile 40 times in training, but this was their first operational submarine contact. At 0356 hours, from 400 yards distance, Blackburn triggered the lee light. 11 million candle power illuminated U-667 as if a second sun had appeared on the ocean surface. The submarine was caught perfectly in profile, diesel engines still running, crew still on deck. The German lookouts literally froze. Post-action interviews with survivors revealed they initially believed they were being illuminated by a surface vessel, because aircraft couldn't possibly appear without engine sound warning. Hartmann screamed the dive order. The deck crew tumbled through the conning tower hatch. The diesel engines shut down with metallic finality. The diving klaxon wailed through the submarine's compartments. The bow planes angled down. U-667 began settling into the water. But submarines don't dive instantly. Even a crash dive requires 30 to 40 seconds to reach safe depth. Blackburn had 20 seconds to firing position. The Mosquito climbed slightly to establish the optimal rocket trajectory, a 15-degree dive angle that would send the projectiles into the submarine's pressure hull at the most vulnerable point, just aft of the conning tower where the control room and radio compartment were located. At 200 yards, Blackburn triggered all 8 rockets in a ripple-fire sequence spread over 1.2 seconds. The 60-pound rocket projectiles covered the distance in under 3 seconds. 6 impacted directly on the submarine's hull. The solid-shot warheads, designed specifically for penetrating submarine pressure hulls, punched through the steel plating and detonated inside the occupied compartments. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The rocket impacts created cascading failures throughout U-667's pressure hull. The first projectile penetrated the outer hull plating near frame 42, exactly where the control room bulkhead met the radio compartment. The explosive charge detonated among the hydraulic systems controlling the diving planes, severing high-pressure lines that sprayed oil throughout the compartment at 3,000 pounds per square inch. The second and third rockets struck within 2 feet of each other, puncturing the pressure hull at the battery compartment. Seawater began flooding into spaces containing the massive lead-acid batteries that powered the submarine's electric motors. The chemical reaction between salt water and battery acid produced chlorine gas, a lethal compound that had killed thousands in the trenches of the previous war. The gas spread through the ventilation systems within seconds. Hartmann, still in the conning tower during the dive sequence, felt the impacts as physical blows transmitted through the submarine's frame. The diving angle steepened beyond normal parameters, the bow planes were no longer responding to control inputs. Emergency lighting flickered as electrical systems began failing. The intercom system died completely, cutting off communication between compartments. Traditional German submarine doctrine required absolute silence during emergencies to assess damage, but the screaming from the battery compartment made silence impossible. Oberleutnant zur See Friedrich Kellermann, the executive officer, was in the control room when the rockets struck. His after-action testimony, given 3 days later aboard HMS Starling after his rescue, provided the only detailed account of the submarine's final minutes. The pressure hull was breached in at least 3 locations. We could hear the ocean entering. The angle became severe, perhaps 30 degrees bow down. Men were sliding forward, unable to maintain positions. The chlorine gas reached the control room within 1 minute. We couldn't breathe. We couldn't see. The emergency breathing apparatus was stored forward, unreachable. U-667 continued diving beyond crush depth not through controlled operation but through catastrophic flooding. The submarine's bow tilted past 40 degrees. Equipment tore loose from mounting brackets. Men tumbled forward in the darkness, crashing into bulkheads and machinery. The emergency blow system, designed to force compressed air into ballast tanks to achieve emergency surfacing, was activated, but the damaged hull could no longer maintain the air pressure necessary for the system to function effectively. At 0358 hours, 2 minutes after the rocket attack, U-667's bow section imploded at approximately 280 feet depth. The pressure hull, designed to withstand depths to 330 feet when intact, failed catastrophically where rocket damage had weakened the structural integrity. The forward torpedo room, crew quarters, and forward battery compartment collapsed in microseconds as millions of pounds of water pressure overcame the damaged steel plating. The stern section, still structurally intact, began rising toward the surface as buoyancy from the intact aft ballast tanks overcame the weight of the flooded forward compartments. 23 men remained alive in the stern section, including Hartmann and Kellermann. They had perhaps 90 seconds before the rising hull breach would reach the surface and the ocean would complete its work. Blackburn circled overhead, watching the ocean surface. The lee light remained active, illuminating an expanding field of diesel fuel, debris, and air bubbles marking where U-667 had disappeared. At 0359 hours, the submarine's stern section broke surface at a steep angle, conning tower emerging like a dying whale breaching one final time. The successful attack on U-667 represented more than a single submarine destroyed. It demonstrated that the technological equation of the Battle of the Atlantic had fundamentally shifted. Within 48 hours, RAF Coastal Command Headquarters at Northwood received Blackburn's detailed after-action report. Within 72 hours, every Coastal Command Group commander had received tactical bulletins describing the engagement. Within 1 week, Mosquito production priorities had been revised to accelerate maritime strike variant delivery. Air Vice Marshal John Slessor, who had assumed command of Coastal Command in February 1943, immediately recognized the implications. In his memorandum to the Admiralty dated March 18, 1943, he wrote, "The Mosquito provides capabilities we have desperately lacked, sufficient speed to prevent submarine diving, sufficient range to cover the mid-Atlantic gap, and sufficient striking power to achieve kills rather than mere damage. We must exploit this advantage ruthlessly and immediately." The tactical employment evolved rapidly through operational experience. Squadron 248, operating from Predanach in Cornwall, pioneered the musketry patrol technique, pairs of mosquitoes working in coordinated patterns to cover maximum ocean area while maintaining mutual support capability. The lead aircraft carried full radar and weapons load. The trailing aircraft, positioned 15 miles behind at different altitude, provided backup and could attack submarines that managed to dive before the lead aircraft completed its attack run. Squadron 235, based at Chivener, developed the Moonlight Sonata approach for operations during lunar periods when submarines preferred to remain surfaced for better visibility. The tactic exploited the Mosquito's silent approach capability, throttling engines to minimum cruise power while descending from altitude eliminated the engine noise that had previously warned submarines. aircraft could approach to within 1 mile before triggering the Lee light, reducing submarine warning time to less than 20 seconds, insufficient for crash dive procedures. By April 1943, Coastal Command had received authorization to convert 4 entire squadrons to maritime strike Mosquitoes. The aircraft were arriving faster than crews could be trained. Experienced bomber crews were transferred directly into Coastal Command, bringing precision attack skills honed over German targets. The transition training, conducted at RAF Turnberry in Scotland, compressed normal training timelines through intensive instruction focused specifically on anti-submarine techniques. Flight Lieutenant Dennis Hayworth, transferring from Halifax bombers to Mosquitoes in April 1943, later described the transition. The Mosquito was revelation after heavy bombers. We'd been flying 4-engine aircraft at 180 knots with 8-man crews. Suddenly we were flying twin-engine fighters at 300 knots with 2-man crews. The speed made us nearly invulnerable. The maneuverability let us attack from angles impossible in heavy aircraft. And the wooden construction meant we could take battle damage that would doom a metal aircraft and still return home. The German response was predictable but ineffective. Donitz issued immediate tactical directives requiring submarines to increase lookout vigilance and reduce surface transit time. U-boat crews received instructions to maintain maximum alertness for high-speed aircraft approaching at low altitude. Additional lookouts were posted. Watch schedules were intensified. But human vigilance could not overcome technological disadvantage. Men scanning dark skies for engine sounds that never came couldn't detect aircraft specifically designed for silent approach. May 1943 became the turning point month that German submariners would later call Black May. Coastal Command Mosquitoes, now operating in significant numbers across the western approaches and Bay of Biscay, achieved submarine contact rates that exceeded all previous aircraft types combined. The statistics told a story of technological superiority translating directly into operational dominance. During May 1943, Mosquito squadrons flew 1,847 operational sorties over Atlantic patrol areas. They achieved 127 submarine contacts, a contact rate of 6.9% per sortie, compared to 2.1% for all other aircraft types. Of these contacts, 89 resulted in attacks before submarines could dive to safe depth. The attacks sank 23 U-boats confirmed and damaged at least 31 others sufficiently to force return to base for repairs. U-boat crew morale, previously sustained by tactical success and Nazi ideology, began collapsing under the reality that surface transit had become suicidal. German naval archives captured after the war revealed the psychological transformation. Corvettenkapitän Peter Kramer, commanding U-333, wrote in his war diary on May 18, 1943, "We are no longer hunters. We are prey. The enemy aircraft appear without warning. No engine sound. No radar detection. Just sudden illumination and rockets. 3 boats from our flotilla lost this week. The men are terrified to surface even in darkness." The German Naval High Command attempted technological countermeasures. New radar detectors were rushed into production to detect the centimetric radar the British were using. Additional anti-aircraft guns were mounted on U-boat conning towers, the flak trap concept where submarines would surface deliberately to lure aircraft into gun range. Neither solution proved effective. The radar detectors couldn't provide sufficient warning time against aircraft approaching at 300 knots at wave height. The anti-aircraft guns required submarines to remain surface during attacks, making them more vulnerable rather than less. Donitz faced an unsolvable tactical dilemma documented in his staff meetings. Submarines operating submerged moved at 4 to 7 knots maximum and depleted batteries within 48 hours. Submarines operating surfaced could achieve 15 to 18 knots but faced near-certain detection and attack in areas with Mosquito coverage. The transit time from French Atlantic ports to operational areas in the mid-Atlantic required 8 to 10 days. Traveling submerged was operationally impossible. Traveling surfaced was increasingly suicidal. By late May, German submarine losses had reached unsustainable rates. Donitz recorded in his personal diary on May 24, 1943, we have lost 41 boats this month. Crew losses exceed 2,000 men. Boat commissioning rate cannot replace losses. For the first time, I must consider whether submarine operations remain viable. On May 24, he made the unprecedented decision to temporarily withdraw U-boats from North Atlantic operations entirely, an admission that the Battle of the Atlantic had fundamentally shifted in favor of the Allies. The withdrawal was presented to crews as temporary tactical repositioning. The reality, understood by experienced commanders, was that the technological advantage had swung decisively against them. The wooden aircraft they had initially dismissed as obsolete had proven to be the weapon that broke the U-boat threat. Furniture factories in Britain had defeated steel foundries in Germany through superior design, superior tactics, and superior operational employment. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. June 1943 saw Coastal Command expand Mosquito operations beyond defensive patrols into offensive hunter-killer missions deep into previously safe German operating zones. The Bay of Biscay, which U-boats had crossed with relative impunity for 3 years, became a killing ground. RAF intelligence had identified specific transit routes German submarines used when departing from and returning to French Atlantic bases at Brest, Lorient, La Pallice, Saint-Nazaire, and Bordeaux. Squadron 307, a Polish manned unit operating from Chivener, pioneered aggressive tactics that German submariners termed the Gauntlet. Flight Lieutenant Eugeniusz Horbaczewski led formations of 4 to 6 Mosquitoes that would patrol overlapping search boxes covering the entire Bay of Biscay approaches. The formations operated at staggered altitudes, some aircraft at 8,000 feet conducting radar sweeps, others at 2,000 feet ready for immediate attack, and reserve aircraft at 12,000 feet providing top cover against Luftwaffe interference. The tactics proved devastatingly effective. On June 12, 1943, Horbaczewski's formation achieved what Coastal Command records described as the perfect intercept sequence. At 1,420 hours, the high-altitude radar aircraft detected U-564 transiting surfaced at coordinates 46 degrees 15 minutes north, 8 degrees 30 minutes west, approximately 180 miles west of Belle Isle. The contact information was transmitted via VHF radio to attack aircraft already descending to strike altitude. U-564's commander, Oberleutnant zur See Hans Fiedler, had been ordered to cross the Bay of Biscay in daylight despite standing orders preferring night transit. Submarine losses had created pressure to maximize operational time in patrol areas, which meant accepting higher transit risks. Fiedler had calculated that daylight crossing with maximum lookout vigilance provided adequate security. His calculations were based on traditional aircraft approach patterns that no longer applied to Mosquito operations. The attack aircraft, piloted by squadron leader Tadeusz Rolski, detected U-564 at 38 miles range and immediately descended to wave height while accelerating to 320 knots. The approach came directly out of the sun, exploiting the one blind spot even vigilant lookouts couldn't continuously scan. At 6 miles distance, U-564's lookouts finally spotted the approaching aircraft, identified by its distinctive twin-engine silhouette and wooden construction that looked almost toy-like compared to metal aircraft. Fiedler ordered the crash dive. The deck klaxon sounded. Lookouts scrambled below. The main ballast tanks began flooding. But U-564 required 35 seconds from dive order to safe submersion depth. Rolski required only 42 seconds to cover the remaining distance and establish attack position. The mathematics were brutally simple: the submarine would still be vulnerable when the Mosquito arrived. At 1,423 hours, Rolski triggered the lee light from 800 yards despite full daylight conditions. The brilliant illumination helped the rocket sight picture even in daytime. U-564 was caught in the perfect attack profile, stern-on presentation with the submarine at approximately 15-degree down angle, conning tower still visible, stern section still above waterline. Rolski ripple-fired all 8 rockets in a precise 3-second sequence, walked the impacts from stern to bow. 6 rockets struck home. The first two penetrated the stern section where the electric motors and aft torpedo room were located. The third and fourth hit amidships, breaching the pressure hull near the diesel engine compartments. The final two struck forward, one penetrating the forward torpedo room, the other impacting the crew quarters. U-564 was mortally wounded in under 4 seconds of combat. The submarine continued its dive but would never reach safe depth. The flooding from multiple pressure hull breaches overwhelmed the bilge pumps within 60 seconds. The bow angled down past 40 degrees. At 1,425 hours, just 2 minutes after the attack, U-564's bow section imploded at 220 feet, well above its theoretical crush depth. The catastrophic structural failure killed all 48 crew members instantly. There were no survivors. By August 1943, the strategic impact of Mosquito anti-submarine operations had become mathematically undeniable. Allied operational analysis documented the transformation with clinical precision. During the first 4 months of 1943, before significant Mosquito deployment, U-boats had sunk an average of 96 merchant ships monthly in the Atlantic. During June, July, and August, with Mosquito squadrons fully operational, the average dropped to 16 ships per month, an 83% reduction in German submarine effectiveness. The inverse relationship was equally stark. German submarine losses in the first 4 months of 1943 averaged 15 boats per month. During the 3 months of peak Mosquito operations, losses averaged 37 boats per month. The unsustainable attrition rate forced fundamental revisions to German naval strategy. Donit's staff calculated that at current loss rates, the entire operational U-boat fleet would be eliminated within 14 months even with maximum production from German shipyards. The Mosquito's impact extended beyond direct kills to operational disruption. Submarines forced to remain submerged for extended periods moved at quarter speed, consumed battery power rapidly, and required 4 times longer to reach operational patrol areas. Time submerged was time not hunting Allied convoys. Intelligence intercepts revealed that average U-boat patrol effectiveness, measured in ships sunk per patrol, had declined from 2.3 ships in early 1943 to 0.4 ships by August 1943. Wing Commander Jefferson Gardner, commanding officer of 248 Squadron, compiled statistical analysis that was distributed throughout Coastal Command. His report documented that Mosquito squadrons achieved submarine kills at 1/10 the operational cost of traditional methods. A single Mosquito sortie cost approximately £180 in fuel, maintenance, and operational expenses. Traditional convoy escort methods required multiple corvettes and destroyers operating continuously, with daily operational costs exceeding £5,000 per convoy. The Mosquito provided dramatically superior cost-effectiveness while achieving higher kill rates. The technological advantages compounded. Wooden construction meant Mosquitoes could be manufactured without consuming strategic aluminum needed for fighters and heavy bombers. Production time for a Mosquito averaged 8,200 man-hours compared to 15,000 man-hours for equivalent metal aircraft. Decentralized production in furniture factories and carpentry shops meant manufacturing capacity could expand rapidly without competing for conventional aircraft industry resources. By September 1943, Coastal Command operated 12 full Mosquito squadrons dedicated to anti-submarine operations, representing approximately 180 operational aircraft. Production schedules projected this would increase to 20 squadrons by year's end. The Germans had no effective counter. Luftwaffe attempts to provide fighter coverage for U-boat transit areas proved futile. Mosquitoes could outrun or outclimb virtually all German fighters while operating over ocean areas where Luftwaffe fighters lacked range and navigation capabilities. German technological responses arrived too late and proved ineffective. The Type XXI U-boat, designed with higher underwater speed and snorkel breathing apparatus allowing submerged diesel operation, wouldn't enter service until 1945. Enhanced radar detectors provided warning but insufficient time for escape against aircraft approaching at 300+ knots. Additional anti-aircraft armament made U-boats more vulnerable by requiring them to remain surfaced during attacks. The strategic calculus had shifted irreversibly. Churchill's greatest fear, that U-boats would strangle Britain's Atlantic lifeline, had been negated by wooden aircraft built in furniture factories. The weapon system that German engineers had dismissed as obsolete proved to be the technological innovation that won the Battle of the Atlantic. The Kriegsmarine's sophisticated steel submarines, products of Germany's finest naval engineering, were systematically destroyed by plywood and balsa wood bonded with glue made from milk protein. Admiral Sir Max Horton, Commander-in-Chief Western Approaches, wrote in his August 1943 assessment, "The Mosquito has achieved what we desperately needed but believed impossible, the ability to hunt submarines across the entire Atlantic with aircraft fast enough to prevent escape and powerful enough to achieve kills. The Battle of the Atlantic is won. The question now is merely how quickly we exploit this advantage." The final statistics of Mosquito anti-submarine operations tell a story of technological triumph that altered the course of World War II. Between March 1943 and May 1945, Coastal Command Mosquito squadrons flew 23,174 operational anti-submarine sorties. They achieved 1,247 submarine contacts, executed 891 attacks, and confirmed 94 U-boat kills with an additional 167 submarines damaged severely enough to abort patrols. The kill-to-sortie ratio of 0.41% exceeded all other anti-submarine aircraft by factors of 3 to 5. More significantly, the Mosquito's presence transformed the strategic equation. By late 1943, German submarines were spending 85% of transit time submerged, a complete reversal from early 1943 when surface transit was standard procedure. This defensive posture reduced operational effectiveness by 70% according to German naval assessments. U-boats that once hunted Allied convoys aggressively now focused primarily on survival during transit to and from patrol areas. The human cost of the submarine war declined dramatically after Mosquito deployment. Allied merchant ship losses dropped from 108 ships in March 1943 to 15 ships in July 1943 and remained at historically low levels for the remainder of the war. An estimated 40,000 merchant seamen's lives were saved by preventing ship sinkings that would have occurred without effective anti-submarine aircraft. The strategic implications extended to the entire Allied war effort. Supplies, equipment, and reinforcements reached Britain and later continental Europe in quantities that made the D-Day invasion possible. Squadron leader Harold Pennington Smythe, who flew 89 anti-submarine missions and achieved 3 confirmed U-boat kills, provided perhaps the most eloquent assessment in his post-war memoir published in 1958, "We flew an aircraft that shouldn't have worked, wood and glue against steel and science." But the Mosquito succeeded precisely because it defied conventional thinking. It was fast enough to catch submarines, tough enough to survive combat, long-ranged enough to cover the Atlantic Gap, and cheap enough to produce in massive numbers. It was the right weapon at the right time, built by piano makers and furniture craftsmen who defeated the Kriegsmarine's best engineers. The technological legacy extended far beyond World War II. The Mosquito demonstrated that composite construction, multiple materials bonded in layered structures, could outperform traditional metal construction in specific applications. Modern aviation's extensive use of composite materials in aircraft from helicopters to advanced fighters traces intellectual lineage directly to de Havilland's wooden wonder. The principle that lighter, stronger, non-metallic materials can provide superior performance remains fundamental to aerospace engineering. The tactical innovations pioneered by Mosquito crews became doctrinal foundations for maritime patrol aviation. Low-altitude approach techniques, radar-directed night attacks, coordinated multi-aircraft search patterns, and precision weapons employment against small, mobile targets, all refined during Mosquito anti-submarine operations, remain core elements of maritime warfare 75 years later. Today, only 3 de Havilland Mosquitoes remain in flying condition worldwide. The aircraft preserved in museums across Britain, Canada, and the United States serve as physical testimony to the technological innovation that won the Battle of the Atlantic. Veterans of Coastal Command, now in their late 90s and beyond, gather annually at RAF museums to commemorate operations that saved thousands of lives and ensured Allied victory. The wooden aircraft that Hitler's submariners learned to fear represented more than engineering cleverness or tactical innovation. It demonstrated a fundamental truth about modern warfare: victory belongs not to the weapons that appear most formidable, but to the systems that effectively integrate technology, tactics, production capacity, and operational doctrine into cohesive capability. German U-boats were magnificent examples of naval engineering. But they were defeated by furniture factories, piano makers, and crews flying wooden aircraft that could outrun, outrange, and outlast the steel submarines they hunted. The Battle of the Atlantic was won by plywood, balsa wood, and adhesive made from milk. The wooden wonder had terrified Hitler's deadliest U-boats into submission and secured the Atlantic lifeline that sustained Allied victory in Europe. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.